Have you ever had the feeling someone or something is watching you late at night while you are alone? Then you will absolutely love this near-death experience. If you like near-death experiences, consider subscribing. Also like the video so you can receive more interesting and eye-opening stories. Alright, let's get to the story. It may be hard for you to understand how one person could have so many paranormal experiences in their life. I'm not sure I fully understand it myself, but I'll try to explain why there is a close connection with the paranormal and the obsession the spirits seem to have with me. It started the day I died. I was 5 years old. It was summertime on the edge of fall. The days were cool and fast tonight. Here is what happened on one of those endless fall nights when I was 5 years old. My older sister and I never did get along, but after that day, it only got worse. My mother told me my sister always wanted a little sister, and when I was born, that just started an ongoing love-hate relationship. Oh well, sorry sis. My sister had an old dollhouse. Back then, most all toys were made of particle wood or a flimsy plastic. However, this dollhouse was constructed from solid wood. That afternoon, my sister decided that she was too old to play with dollhouses. She took the house to the backyard and placed it by the garbage cans. Well, that told me she didn't want it anymore, so it was time to play demolition derby with my father's hammer. Smash, bang, crash. Man, did I have fun. Pieces and parts of that house were all over the backyard. Later, I found out that the dollhouse belonged to my favorite great-aunt Lil. I wish I'd never destroyed the dollhouse because it had to be at least 100 years old. Anyway, I left the carnage strewn all across the backyard. That afternoon, my sister came home from school and went out back to retrieve the dollhouse from the garbage. I was inside with my mother baking cookies when we heard a scream come from the backyard. My mom and I went flying out to see what happened. I'd forgotten about what I had done to the house. As we approached the door leading to the yard, my sister came bursting through the door, screaming and yelling at me.
You little brat! You stupid little brat!
My mother stood spellbound at the sight of the utter destruction that lay before her in the battlefield we used to call our backyard. She told me to leave the mess to show my father when he came home. With that statement, it began to click that maybe it wasn't such a good idea to wreck the dollhouse. That evening, Dad came home from work, and the second he stepped through the door, was met by my mom and sister squawking at him. They both laid into him about what I had done. He grabbed me and marched me out to the backyard. When he saw the amount of havoc I played on that innocent dollhouse, he just stood and stared in disbelief. How could a 5-year-old boy do so much damage to such a well-built toy? He asked me, "What were you thinking?" I said,
"She threw it out and I played with it."
Simple. What came next is very interesting. My dad told me that after supper I was to grab a garbage can and pick up every scrap of house I could find. So that's exactly what I did. It was summer-fall, as we used to like to say. Not summer and not quite fall. The nights started to come sooner than normal, so by 5:30 p.m. it was dark out there. It took me about an hour to clean up all the mess. As I put the last piece of house in the can, my mom called me in to get ready for bed. I was to go to bed early that night. I started walking up the back steps to go into the house, and as I grabbed the doorknob, I felt a pinch and a burning behind my right ear. I was startled, to say the least, and man did it hurt. I walked into the kitchen where my mother and sister were putting the dinner dishes away. The first one to me was my sister, who, much to my surprise, looked very concerned. My mom was next. My dad had gone fishing, and at that time, there were no cell phones. The look on both their faces was complete amazement and horror. I suppose I should describe what they saw. In just a few words, I looked like the Michelin tire boy. If you've ever seen the ads before, this image should pretty much cover it. I started to feel nauseated and very sleepy. What had happened, if you haven't already guessed, a wasp stung me. Not an ordinary wasp, but a black wasp, one of the most lethal species in North America. It just so happens that I was allergic to wasp venom. No one knew until that night. To explain briefly what happens when a wasp or bee stings you. A person allergic to bee or wasp venom goes into what is referred to as anaphylactic shock. This causes your endocrine system to kick into high gear and release histamine to counteract the venom, which in turn causes your body to flood your system with liquid. You virtually drown in your own fluids. Nice, huh? The next thing I remember was my godfather at the front door, and a police car waiting outside ready to take me to the hospital. My sister and mother were crying. My godfather scooped me up and carried me to the police car. On the way to the hospital, the police officer asked me if I'd like the siren on. I nodded yes, and on it came. That was one of the last things I remember prior to waking up in the hospital. What I do remember during the time I was out is a bit fuzzy. I was sitting in a dark room with a single light above my head, kind of like a spotlight shining down. The darkness wasn't something you could see. Moreover, an inky blackness you could feel. All of a sudden, a gray-black twister came out of the darkness and scooped me up. There was no noise, just a twister. I couldn't be sure, but it felt like there were people speaking to me inside the twister. What was being said to me wasn't real words, more like thought words, mostly telling me what I can and can't do. Along with the voices inside the twister was the feeling that there were others outside, watching me, seemingly waiting for something to happen, an anxious feeling of dread. I only felt it when I tried to move outside the twister into the dark. It was almost as if the dark was alive. Have you ever had the feeling someone or something is watching you, late at night while you are alone? That's the feeling I had. I traveled for a while in the darkness, and occasionally I would see light spots, as if a single beam of light had been pointed at the ground. After a while, I saw myself heading towards one of those lit spots. As I approached, I could see people milling around in the light. Some were standing in the lighted area, and others just between the light rim and the dark. As I moved closer, I could see children about my age playing with a whole bunch of puppies. I wasn't able to get down to play with the children because the twister kind of held me like a mother cradling a baby. However, I could lean out of the twister to touch the kids and puppies. In fact, one little girl held a puppy up to me and said, "Hi, here you have one." At once, the twister began to move away from the light and the kids with the puppies. I reached out to grab a puppy, but I was moving too fast. The light began to fade until there was only the dark nothingness. That is when I woke up. I was lying on my back looking up at a bright light when the image of a nurse and a doctor came into focus. They were saying something to me, but I couldn't hear very well. My body was itchy and it ached all over. I can't remember how I got home that night or how long I was sick because of the incident. I overheard people saying how lucky I was and that I had died several times. Apparently, I died a couple of times on my way to the hospital and a couple of times while I was there. A short time after is when things began to happen around our house. Strange things like voices, smells, and bumps in the night. In the morning, we would find chairs moved around, cupboard doors open, and the contents thrown on the floor. The cats would walk around with the hair on their backs standing up. Sometimes they would run through the house as if someone was chasing them, their tails poofed out, wide-eyed and wired. As time went by, people would come to visit, but soon after they arrived, they would make excuses as to why they had to leave so abruptly. Foul odors would waft through the house, causing my parents to scoot around opening doors and windows to chase out the stench. Even in the dead of winter, many people, including family members, believed that something happened to open a corridor between the living world and the afterlife, or wherever I went the night I died. My mom and dad did say they couldn't remember any of these occurrences happening prior to my incident. The house I grew up in was my grandmother's before it became ours. Our family lived in this house for over 100 years. I would have thought, in all that time, there would have been at least one reported paranormal event. Wouldn't you? Watch this next about a woman who died during labor and merged with the light in heaven. She also gets to see and meet her guide in her life review.